Welcome to Web Development Lesson 3.1. In this lesson, we're going to introduce the third component of basic web development, which is JavaScript. We're going to explore something called events, which will allow us to interact with the user. And you're going to learn your first piece of JavaScript code, which is the alert command. So let's get to it. So what is JavaScript? JavaScript is a programming language primarily used on the web, but in recent years it's being used in other locations as well, other environments. Now, because it's a programming language, it does share the same basic concept as other programming languages such as Python, Java, C++, in that you will explore variables, mathematical operations, function objects, decision making, for loops. Again, it's a full-fledged programming language with all the capabilities that other programming languages have. In this lesson, though, and I would also say in the next lesson, we're going to primarily focus on how we integrate JavaScript with the HTML first before we start covering the basic programming concepts. Let's review what we have in terms of our example on Replit. So we have three images in here, which we would like to get the user to interact with them. So we have a scenario where it says, display the words HTML when the user clicks on the image. Now, from a previous lesson in CSS, you may recall that when we saw the word when, it triggered us to think of the hover, which allowed us to change some CSS when the user hovered over an image. Same concept, because what we're looking to do is we're looking to target an event. Now, unlike CSS, which really only has the hover as a way to interact with the user, JavaScript lets you interact with elements in many different ways. This is called an event listener. So let me show you an example of what we're talking about first, and then we'll explore some of the other events. So when you see the word when the user clicks on an image, we need to introduce an event listener, which is on click. This is the event listener. It's the event that's in the scenario. So we want the user to click on something. So we're going to say on click. And now we want it to do something. Now, as we mentioned in the preview, the lesson preview, we're going to introduce the alert. The alert is a pop-up window, which you're going to see here in a second. And all we want to do is that when we click on this picture, the first one, we want a pop-up window that simply says HTML. So let's look at it. And there it is. So I clicked on the first picture, and this window popped up, this pop-up window. This is the result of the alert. Now, you might notice here that I use double quotes on the outside and then single quotes on the inside. That's so the computer doesn't get confused as to which quotes close which part. I'll demonstrate on the next one why it's important to have this mixed match of quotations. So let's try this one now. When the user moves their mouse over. So again, the word when should trigger you to think, okay, this is an event. I'm asking the user to do something. So we're going to say on. Now, one of the cool things about using an IDE is that it starts to kind of give you some options as to what you can do. Now, because it said on mouse, do something when the mouse is interacting. So move their mouse over. Now, you can see here there is a mouse over. And that's the event we want. So we're going to do alert of, and this is CSS. Now, I promised you I was going to show you the mix match issue with this. Okay, so this is the way it's supposed to look. Now, let's say I decided to use double quotes for all the quotations. Notice how the color changes. This now doesn't look like the text over here. That's because the computer's going to do this. It's going to match this quotation with this quotation and say, hey, you're done. This is another attribute That's not what we're looking to do. So that's the reason we have to do the mix match, so that the computer realizes all of this is the JavaScript we want to execute when we move our mouse over this particular picture. Again, with practice, you'll get used to this. But for right now, just realize, use double quotes for the outside and then single quotes for the text that's on the inside. So let's run this and let's test out the first one again. Notice that it still works. So I could click on HTML. The alert box pops up with the words HTML right here. I know it's a little bit small, but it's okay. It serves its purpose. And now let's move our mouse over. So I'm not going to click on it. I'm simply going to move my mouse over the picture. And notice how the pop-up box, the alert box, displays immediately. Now, I will say that that can get kind of annoying because let's say you're just nonchalantly moving across the page and boom, the alert box pops up. Again, we're using the alert box right now just as a means to explore event listeners. This is not something you typically see in professional websites, the alert box. But it is a convenient way to kind of just run some code real quick. All right, let's try the last one now. So we want to display JavaScript when the user moves their mouse off an image. So mouse off. So again, we got to do an event listener. So we're going to start with the word on, which is a dead giveaway that something's an event listener. All the event listeners start with the word on. And let's see. We want to move our mouse off. So there is no mouse off, but there is a mouse out. So that's where you may have to compromise a little bit when you start looking at events. It might not match directly to what the scenario says, but there should be one that's real close to the action that you're looking to do. So let's do alert. What's this one? This is JavaScript. Oops. And let's close out the parentheses. Now, one thing you will notice, and actually, you know what? Let me leave it like this. Now that we've entered into JavaScript, syntax errors are going to occur, which means something went wrong. Typically, when we did HTML and CSS, we didn't have syntax errors. There wasn't anything yelling at us that something was wrong. Now that we're in JavaScript, that's going to happen. So I'm actually purposely introducing an error here, which is not to close off the parenthesis to the alert. And I'm going to try to execute it on the last picture. Now notice I have to move my mouse out. So it's not going to get triggered when I put my mouse on the picture. It's going to get triggered when I take my mouse off of the picture. So when I move my mouse back off of it now, it should try to run that JavaScript, but it won't because it has an error. And there you go. All right, so now things, I don't know if you want to think of it as helpful now, because again, up until now with the HTML and CSS, there were no hints as to where your errors were. You kind of just had to look at your code. Now you will get errors. And you can see here it says missing parenthesis after argument list in line 16. So there we go. So let's put the parenthesis in there. Let's try it again. And let's just go through all of them. So this one, I have to click on it in order to get the alert box. There it is. The second one, I simply have to move my mouse over it to get the alert box. In the last one, I have to move my mouse off of it. So notice it doesn't get triggered when I put my mouse on it. It has to come off of it before it gets triggered. These are event listeners. All right, so again, event listeners always start with the word on, and then there's some action involved. What is it that you want the user to do? I'm going to go to W3 Schools and then just kind of show you a list of this is definitely the more common ones. And I would say on click, on mouse over, on mouse out, on key down, on load will primarily be the ones that you work with. But there is a long list of many different types of events that you can react to. Some of them involve the user. Some of them involve just the way the web page is loaded, whether certain things have happened on the page. Just like CSS, just like HTML, there's so many things out there. Don't try to be an expert at it. Just understand that it's there for you. And if you need to somehow figure something out, look it up. Again, the process of looking something up and figuring out how to use it is probably more important than simply knowing a lot. Again, it definitely makes you a better programmer to be able to quickly adjust from an example. So let's go back to our example. All right, so I've been doing this primarily on pictures, but you can do JavaScript. You can add these event listeners to any element. So let's do this. Let's add an H1. And let's say hello world, which is traditionally like your first programming example. So I want to do it so when I click on the words hello world, I get the message that says hi. So we're going to add in our event listener. So we're going to say on click, because we want the person to click on the words hello world. And we're simply going to say hi. Let's try that out. All right, so let's move this. Oops. Okay, so there's the words hello world. Again, nothing's happening when I put my mouse over it because I have to click on it. So let me click on it. And there goes the word hi. What you'll notice though, there's nothing really indicating that you should click on this, nor on this picture. You know, we know because we're the programmers of the web page, we know that we can click on it. But there's nothing visual about either of these two elements that lets you know that it's clickable. So we're going to borrow something that people are used to that gives them that visual cue that something is clickable. And that's the little hand from hyperlinks. So let's add a little CSS to this. So we're going to create a class called clickable. So that way we don't necessarily have to target individual elements. We just make a class and then we could add the class to all elements that we want to somehow make them clickable in the sense of a visual cue. So there is a property called cursor, which allows you to change the actual mouse. So we're going to change it to be the pointer. And now we're going to apply that class to the first one, which has an on click, and also the last one. Again, just so that the user has that visual cue. Oh, wait a minute. I can click on this. So before I run it, I just want to review again. Notice there's nothing indicating that I can click on this. I'm going to run it. And now look what happens when I put my mouse over the words. Notice it turns into a little hand. Again, that's that visual cue that will prompt somebody, oh, you know what? Let me click on this. And there's the hi. Same thing with this image. So let me click on this, and now I see the HTML. So let's go back to our presentation. So in this lesson, we introduced JavaScript, which is a programming language. We're going to delve deeper into the traditional programming concepts such as variables, if statements, mathematical operations, for loops in future videos. In this video, we introduced event listeners, which is a way for us to interact with the user. All event listeners start with the word on, and then followed by some actions such as on click, on mouse over, on load, and so on. Your first piece of JavaScript was a pop-up window called an alert box. So hopefully you're excited that we're actually starting to make some functional websites, and I look forward to seeing what you can do. Enjoy.